Welcome to Fast Politics.
Hello, Molly. Thank you very much indeed.
I shouldn't laugh. We laugh to keep from crying. So you live in this very small country that doesn't really matter, but
Actually, fucking unbelievable. Yeah, carry on.
it,
I love the way, not even a question before you start attacking my country. It's extraordinary, the efficiency with which you do it.
I'm coming to a question here through the insults, which is you guys ruined your country with Brexit. We now are ruining our country with Trump 2.0. Discuss.
You guys, you are so Brexit, and I don't think you even know it. I have, Brexit was like a training ground for us to now watch you do all the same things to
Yeah.
yourselves that we did, possibly to a more severe degree. And that, I mean,
Yes.
especially this last week. I mean, I remember when you and I first talked, one of the distinctions was, I would say, Trump is a much more kind of visually arresting, more shocking phenomenon, but it's a more superficial form of damage. Whereas Brexit
Yes.
was more boring, more tedious, but you were messing around with like the engine room, with the structure of a country. Now that is no longer the case. Like Trump's damage is now structural. You look at
Yes.
it to look this week. This week was basically like end of empire stuff. It's not about the stock market. It was about, you look at what's happening to treasuries, you look at what's happening to the dollar, that sense of America being a safe, reliable, boring place to put your money. The place that you put your money when you don't want any kind of risk, any kind of political instability. It's just the default location. If for anyone around the world, for what you're going to do with your money, when you see declines in treasuries, in the dollar, at the same time as a decline in the stock market, that's a sign that people are basically going, no, hang on a minute, that country just went absolutely batshit. We're not going to put our money there any longer. That's the kind of thing you see when an empire is coming to an end. So to watch it happening there was it was pretty dispiriting that you guys chose to learn absolutely nothing about the way that we fucked ourselves over. You learned nothing, not a thing.
It is the Gore Vidal quote, "We are the United States of amnesia," because we learn nothing, we remember nothing, we know nothing. We are in a constant state, near constant state of amnesia. What I think is so fascinating about this, right? And then also there's the bond market, right? Bonds, we're seeing it all sort of just crater in real time. I'm wondering if you guys have sanctioned yourself. That's what Brexit is. Now we are sanctioning ourselves. That's what tariffs are.
Yeah.
What is the real effect of that as someone living in the UK?
Honestly, well, don't even take Brexit. Just take Liz Truss, right?
Right.
Liz Truss freaked out the bond market. That's the main thing that she did. And that was partly a rational assessment. What she was doing was basically saying we're going to cut taxes, which, obviously increases demand at the same time as the Bank of England was trying to sort of kill off a bit of demand to kill off inflation by raising interest rates. So the rational argument was the government doesn't know, like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Like there's no basic rationality to your economic policy. And then behind that rational argument with Liz Truss, there was a vibes argument. Like never, ever underestimate vibes in economic calculation, the way the markets respond, because they do. If they get shitted up somehow, predominantly for rational reasons, but sometimes not, it's really hard to make them come back on side. So what
Yeah.
happened? We are still now, it's been years since Liz Truss took place. I mean, we had exactly the same situation that you've just gone through in terms of the market reaction, in terms of the bond market reaction.
Right.
It's been years now. And every time our chancellor does the smallest little movement, makes the smallest financial bit of tinkering, we see we see the yield soar, we see this really anxious, befuddled reaction in the bond markets. We see the government basically losing any kind of bandwidth it has for policy options in the economy because of the after effects of Liz Truss. Because this stuff,
Yeah.
you can do it, but the scar, man, that's the thing, is once the initial shock fades, the scar is still there, and the scar will limit your ability to serve your people as a government long after Donald Trump has gone and long after a new president is in place.
Yeah, I think
I'm sorry,
that's
I didn't have any good news for you guys. I'm so sorry.
oh no, we don't expect good news here. I don't know if you know, but I actually have been paying attention for the last decade. So I have been expecting this from you saw all these very, very wealthy people who had gotten very on to Trump 2.0, despite having lived through Trump 1.0. And they were like, I don't understand why he's behaving so irrationally. I was like, really?
Yeah, I know.
You don't
I
get
can't
that?
this it just it breaks my mind.
Yeah,
I don't even understand which world I'm living in. Have they just been watching like a completely different movie for the last decade of my life for their sudden surprise? And then of course I think it almost became boring to just keep on saying the same thing over and over again, which is Trump is demonstrably an idiot. I mean, one of the stupidest people that's ever been put in charge of a major country. And he does really idiotic things. And that is the sum total of the political analysis that you require of this man or
right.
any kind of administration that he leads. But because it's a boring thing to say, because everyone's basically known this since at least 2015, you have to
Yeah,
come up with something new to say. So they start coming up with these imaginative myths about, oh, well, he's, actually following this really careful, clever strategy. And, oh, it's a bit fair, actually, when you think about the way the Chinese have rigged the international. All of this stuff is just complete horseshit, but it presents this image of intellectual structure to a government that does not possess it. And therefore, I think
right.
gave people this extra degree of confidence, especially people that were working with investors.
Yeah, no, and I also think really wealthy people will tell themselves anything to get a tax cut.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they really hate paying taxes. So when we talked last time, Keir
Can you
Stammer?
literally are you actually incapable of saying his name? This is
Yes,
amazing. I mean, I
incapable.
feel it's not even like a hard name to say. It's just Keir Starmer.
Whatever. That guy, how you feeling? How you feeling? You were optimistic, and I
Yeah,
love that for you, but
thank
I
you.
worried that it would not stick.
It hasn't really stuck.
Oh.
Look, it's not really his fault. I mean, he's a kind of
This
a
is
decent
how we
man.
talked about Biden for those
I
4
know.
years. It's
Yeah, but
not really his fault. He's a decent man.
all of
Sorry,
that
go
was true.
on.
I mean, I think Biden was a really good president. Did some very radical, impressive things. Made
Yeah,
people's lives a lot better in a way that they should perhaps have a little think about now that the economy is going much worse. Look, the rest of the world, we don't have a different news agenda to the one that you guys have. It's the same news agenda. Like I guarantee you will know every story that's in our news agenda. We know every story that's in yours because the whole world, there's just one story, which is Donald Trump. There is no other story. Because and it's not like in the first term, it was mostly because we were all kind of like grotesquely fascinated by the
right,
horror of it, but we weren't particularly really that affected. Now
right.
we're fucking affected. Like whether it comes to Ukraine and European defense, whether it comes to what's going on with tariffs, we're incredibly affected. It's like we're all trapped in a room with this murderous, deranged clown, like just injecting meth into his veins and walking around with a gun. And each morning you wake up and think, what will the clown do? Like, will it shoot me? Or will it shoot itself? Or will it shoot the walls? So this is essentially how it feels. So for someone like Keir Starmer, you have no options really. You have to sit there and think, I have to get on with him. The
Right.
entirety of my country's economic and defense posture is reliant on the US. Um, but at the same time, it's madness. It's just lunacy what is happening over there. And he has to kind of react to that. And of course, like from a British point of view, it's just very frustrating to watch this quite quiet, decent man get soaked into that vortex of lunacy and try and survive. So no, it's hard to say nice things about Starmer at the moment. It's not really his fault, but it is the case.
So if you're Europe and you see that America, which has been this incredible ally since World War II, with the blip for Trump 1.0, but now it seems pretty clear that Republicans are MAGA and MAGA are Republicans, and Republicans no longer are too interested in the world order post World War II at all, period, paragraph. What do you do? I mean, like, you've had this ally who has been a backstop. That ally is gone.
Mm. And it wasn't just resources, by the way, it was command. Like you look at
Right.
any kind of NATO strategy for war in Europe, it was always America was in the lead because America had just operational efficiency. You decide to do something and you do it. Europe
Right.
has no operational efficiency, right? There's like a bunch of countries. All we ever do is squabble. Even with Britain
Right.
out, all that ever happens is like squabbling. You will never be able to have just one line of command. So most of the military preparations the story in Europe right now is the creation of a military Europe. Like this is we will talk about this in history books in 50 years time as an absolutely seminal moment in what is happening. It is about, yes, ramping up capacity and production, but also trying to create some kind of idea for how you create an operational command. And a lot of that, by the way, genuinely, you'll hear people say it's a shame that America stayed in NATO. Like that, actually, it would have been easier if
Yeah,
Trump had just left NATO, because we would have had a pre-existing structure for Europe to think about its own defense. Now you have to
right.
kind of come up with a different
Go
institutional
around
system.
NATO.
Exactly. Yeah. This coalition of the willing stuff. I noticed the Trump administration scoffing at it quite a lot. You know, in a few years' time, maybe it would be 5 years, maybe it'll be 10 years. As a result of what Europe is doing right now and just the amount of spending and the amount of thought it's going into creating independent military products that do not rely on American servicing, Europe is at some point just going to not do what the Americans want it to do on a
Yeah.
military matter, on a political matter. And at that time, that's going to be a shock, I think, for America. It's going to be like the Suez Crisis for Britain. It's going to be this moment of like, oh shit, like our assumptions about our hegemony seem to be falling down around us. And the origin of that moment lies now in Europe ramping up military production, but also ramping up its own sense of we have to take control of our own affairs. We cannot rely on America anymore. And that thought is not a Trump thought. People are aware that people voted for him, that enough American voters clearly just do not care about Europe or any of the consequences of him, that they were willing to vote for this guy, and they could vote for another guy that's just like him, even when he goes away. So on that basis, yeah, this stuff is permanent and it's absolutely seminal.
And that speaks to this, the dollar no longer being the currency, right? This is this idea that America is no longer the center of the world. We've squandered, right? We used to have this soft power through foreign aid. We used to be this sort of grown up in the room. That is no longer true.
I think the dollar thing is going to take a while. I mean, this was like a body blow,
Right.
but it's going to take a while. Some of the European thinking at the moment, and this is tentative, like this isn't kicked off yet, and there isn't agreement on it. But it's about really whether, if you can create euro bonds for some of the military spending, there is a chance of Europe just becoming this place that money goes to find stability in a volatile period. And then there's quite genuinely, people are talking about the euro could be a global reserve currency. It could essentially
Yeah.
take the dollar's place. And people are thinking
Yes.
consciously, we can combine these two things, we can make this work. There is a lot of things that need to happen for that to take place. But
Right.
that is a thing that people are talking about now, which would have sounded like sci-fi 6 weeks ago, let alone any more than that. Honestly, I think for Americans think that the world thinks of them like kind of John Wayne or like a cowboy or whatever. The truth is that the world's image of Americans, I think, would, especially in Europe, was more about the people that you'd meet in an American airport. There would always just be
Mhm.
these tremendously friendly Americans that you would meet in the airport, and they're so much more talkative and effusive and warm than most Europeans. And
We're
they'll tell you about,
great.
oh, yeah, my son-in-law does this. Oh, he's a doctor. Oh, you know what? He lived in Bradford and blah, 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 and you just have this chat. Most of the world's image of Americans was actually that. It was like the friendly middle-aged woman in the queue at the airport that would ask you about your brother or your brother-in-law or whatever. And now it's just a really different image, it's this crybaby toddler full of resentments and threats of violence and trying to demean you, and so it's just horrific, really. I mean, especially for those of us who love America, I've got to say, like, that part is very hard for Europeans to accept. And the protests that we saw, was that like last weekend, I think, or like a week ago? That was very reassuring, I think, to a lot of people, because we'd seen
Yeah.
so little from Democrats, from
Yeah.
liberal figures. Everyone seemed so cowed. I know that there's no real political impact of those protests, but from Europe to just see America, like the better side of the American personality, standing up against this stuff, was a deeply reassuring
Millions.
sight. Mm.
Millions of people. I mean, it's like Israel, right? There are people who like Netanyahu, but there are many more people who do not want to be involved in any of this. And
Mm.
that's what we saw in America. And for Americans to get to the streets in those numbers, there were 7 towns and cities in Alaska that had protests, right? Alaska, a red state where 10 people live. So, right, this is not popular, but I think it is meaningful. And I think what you're saying is really important. So, as we sort of game this out, is there any way at this point to, I don't think that Trump wants to roll this back, but if he wanted to, what would be the play to make the America seem stable in the eyes of the world?
Oh, I don't think that's a possibility now, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah,
I mean, I think he will fold on. I mean, just the trade war with China. I haven't seen any of the basic preparations that you would expect on pharmaceutical goods, on microchips, on essential minerals. You need all that shit from China. Like China has
right.
escalation advantage in a trade war with the
Yeah,
US. I mean, the Americans think they don't because of the trade surplus. This has got nothing fucking do with it. China has escalation advantage because it has a bunch of shit that America needs. So there's been no prep. There's been, I mean, that is just fucking like, if you just on the base level of your sense of national responsibilities, if you're going to go into a trade war, make sure that you can win, at least have planned something for what you're going to do for the goods that you're no longer going to be able to access. So on that basis, I think he folds, and I'm sure he'll
yeah,
come up with some kind of story about his next level 4D chess strategic genius for having done so. But I think he folds, but that doesn't really get you anywhere. And in fact, if you look at the market reaction, when he pauses in some cases, in some ways, the tariffs the other day, sure, the market soars, but the next day reaction was quite telling because it's still
right.
this like, okay, we're not drunk, we're not terrified anymore, but just the basic objective assessment of where we are with the American economy, with the world economy, with what's going on with China is a very, very dispiriting story indeed. And the fundamentals of his personality, and if I'm completely honest, structurally, of an American electoral system that would produce someone like him repeatedly and therefore runs the risk of doing it again in future, means you just like, well, no, I mean, we can't fucking. This is like this. America is essentially an emerging market in political, terms, in your assessment of how it operates. It's volatile, it's not stable, it's highly unpredictable. It's all the things that investors don't like. Yeah, I think that's gone now. I think any opportunity to fix that is gone. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am.
And it's also a kleptocracy.
Yeah, it
I
is.
mean, if it isn't yet, it certainly will be soon.
Yeah, well, I mean, also just the wanton disregard for the law. I mean, obviously that Truth Social, whatever the fuck his dimwit social media thing is, of encouraging people to buy just before it soars. I mean, that would just they would have been in criminal investigations in any other era as to what's going on there. I mean, seeing Elon Musk, this Gen X social reject with his huge checks, just bribing voters like a whenever people say, well, this is like it's like watching 1984, you just think George Orwell has almost nothing to tell us about what's going on. This is idiocracy. This is the film Idiocracy made real. Like if you're allowing this level of corruption, a demonstrable corruption to happen without any kind of legal check, then no, of course the basic rule of law has collapsed and you're seeing a kind of oligarchic capture that's really not that dissimilar to the kind of thing that you would see in kind of like post-Cold War, pre-Putin
Mhm.
Russia. That's the kind of, instant comparison that you would go for. This has
Yeah,
been a
yeah,
very
yeah.
cheery conversation. I'm sure we're both feeling much better now.
I feel great. I'm so tired that I feel like slightly stoned. I'm all in. I got 5 hours of sleep, 4 hours and 37 minutes of sleep. So, but it's pretty bleak. Ian, will you please come back?
Anytime you want.